Well, you can put away your central heating, hot chocolate, televisions and PlayStations. We're going to transport you back to a world gripped by relentless cold, where rivers freeze solid, crops fail and hunger stalks the land. Could you survive the Little Ice Age in England? That's the conundrum we're looking at today. This wasn't just a slightly chilly period. It was a time of extreme hardship where entire communities faced starvation, disease and the constant threat of freezing to death. I will transport you back to England sometime during the Little Ice Age and will explore everything from how people heated their draughty homes, what they ate when they could eat, to the ingenious ways they entertained themselves and the devastating impact of events like the Great Famine. We'll uncover the secrets of their resilience and adaptation, revealing whether you would have had what it takes to survive. So without further ado, let's get started. So, what was the Little Ice Age and how would we survive it? Well, wrap up warm as we're going to take a trip back to a typical winter in England during the Little Ice Age. Imagine life without your modern amenities that most of us today take for granted, such as central heating or thermally efficient homes. That was the reality for people back then, and to make matters worse, they had the English winter to contend with. The Little Ice Age started roughly around the year 1300 and lasted to about 1850ish. Now, these weren't your average English winters. Heaven knows they would have been hard enough. No, we're talking about a prolonged period of seriously chilly temperatures. For most years, think longer, harsher winters and shorter, cooler summers. Not exactly ideal for growing crops or keeping warm. The Little Ice Age was not a true ice age of global extent, but rather a period of significant climatic downturn, following what has subsequently become known as the medieval warm period. This was a time of relatively mild climate in Europe, where vineyards flourished as far north as Newcastle. This transition marked a real shift towards harsher and more unpredictable weather patterns that profoundly impacted societies, not just in England, but across Europe and beyond. However, the Little Ice Age was not just about colder temperatures. It brought a host of extreme weather events. Winters were, of course, significantly colder and longer, with increased snowfall and frost. But summers, too, were often cool and wet, leading to crop failures and famines. Heavy rains, hailstorms and flooding were also more frequent, causing widespread damage and hardship. Even before the Little Ice Age, winters from the late Middle Ages, not just in England, but for most of Europe, were challenging to say the least. However, the colder temperatures and extreme weather during these few centuries intensified the existing hardships. Cold, starvation and illness became constant threats, particularly for the poor and the vulnerable, which was pretty much most of the population. The agricultural system, already susceptible to weather fluctuations, often struggled to cope with the changing conditions. This led to food shortages and the inevitable social unrest. While medieval descriptions provide vivid accounts of extreme weather conditions, they lack precise temperature measurements, as accurate measurements could not be taken until the mid-17th century. These accounts, often found in chronicles, annals and personal letters, offer valuable insights into the lived experiences of people during the Little Ice Age. The hardships of this age left a lasting impact on European culture and folklore. Stories and legends emerged that reflected the anxieties and fears of the time. Towards the end of this age, the Brothers Grimm's fairy tale Hansel and Gretel, with its themes of famine, abandonment and the dangers of the forest, is often interpreted as a reflection of society's memory of this challenging era. So here we are, back in the late Middle Ages England, a time of knights, castles and, well, varying degrees of comfort. Well, you wish. Actual life for most people was very different, and when it came to housing and heating, there was a stark contrast between the haves and the have-nots, or in this case, the peasants and the wealthier folk. Let's take a look at how these two groups coped living through a typical harsh winter during what was to be the start of the Little Ice Age. We'll begin with a peasant's abode. Imagine a house made of wood or woven sticks, known as wattle, and a mix of mud, clay and straw. This would be, of course, daub. Sounds lovely, doesn't it? Well, for medieval peasants, this was their reality. These materials, while readily available, didn't exactly provide the best insulation. Picture a house with cracks and gaps where the wind whistled through. It would be like trying to stop a breeze with a colander. Now, of course, we have to remind ourselves that not all peasants' housing was equal. Some were better built and sealed than others. So if you were unfortunate to end up with a poorly built home, well, good luck with that. Heating these humble dwellings was also a challenge. Forget fancy fireplaces with chimneys. Peasants relied on a central fire for warmth, cooking and light. To let the smoke out, they had ventilation holes in the roof or walls. The result? A smoky interior that might make your eyes water just thinking about it. It's safe to say that fresh air wasn't exactly a priority. Sometimes a peasant's house consisted of a second floor, not usually for extra living space, but for storage. And in some cases they even shared their home with their livestock. This of course brought its own problems, not to mention sanitation, insect infestation and, well, the inevitable disease. Now let's take a peep into the world of the wealthy. This lucky few had the luxury of stone houses, which were definitely more durable than peasant homes. But a stone house has a downside. They are inherently colder and harder to keep warm. Imagine living in a stone castle with minimal heating. There wouldn't be much coziness there. To combat the cold, the wealthy used portable braziers, which were basically metal containers filled with hot coals. These could be moved from room to room, providing a bit of warmth wherever needed. But there is a catch to this. Open flames in a room full of tapestries and wooden furniture. Well, let's just say many a fire was started in the homes of the wealthy because of this. And what about windows? Well, glass windows were a rare and expensive luxury, limited to the elite. Most windows were simply openings in the wall, which of course meant more drafts. To keep out the cold, people used wooden shutters or early forms of window sealing. These included using plaster or paper coverings to block drafts and provide some insulation. These methods were not very effective, but they represent an early understanding of the need to control airflow and retain heat. So, whether you were a peasant huddled around a smoky fire or a wealthy lord trying best not to set your house on fire, heating during the late Middle Ages posed a significant challenge. Imagine trying to rush a baby to grow into a fully fledged adult in half the time. It's just not going to happen. That's essentially what shorter growing seasons do to crops. They disrupt the natural rhythm of planting, growth and harvest. When the window of opportunity for crops to mature shrinks, it throws everything out of kilter. crops need a certain amount of time and warmth to develop properly. If the growing season is cut short by early frosts and late springs, plants don't have enough time to reach their full potential. This can lead to a variety of problems, such as reduced yields where plants may produce smaller fruits or vegetables, or fewer grains resulting in a lower overall harvest. Immature crops where they may not fully ripen before the end of the season, making them inedible or less nutritious. And of course, all this made any crops more vulnerable to disease, which can further reduce yields. The impact of shorter growing seasons can be particularly severe for staple crops like wheat and corn, which are essential for feeding large populations. Widespread crop failures can lead to food shortages, price increases, and even famine in extreme cases. Now we come to hay and straw, the lifeblood for livestock. Farmers rely on these stored feeds to keep their animals nourished during the winter months or when pastures are scarce. But what happens when Mother Nature decides to turn on the sprinklers for an extended period? Heavy rains can wreak havoc on the hay and straw supplies. Imagine leaving a loaf of bread out in the rain. It would quickly become a soggy, mouldy mess. The same thing happens to hay and straw. Excessive moisture can cause them to rot and decompose. This not only makes them unpalatable to animals, but also reduces their nutritional value. Fodder would also develop mould and mildew, resulting in it being harmful to livestock if ingested, thus causing health issues. If the fodder became waterlogged, it would make it difficult to transport and store. When hay and straw are ruined, farmers are left scrambling to find alternative feed sources for their animals. This can be costly and challenging, especially if other farmers in the region are facing the same problem. A lack of fodder can lead to malnutrition and weight loss in livestock, reduced milk production in dairy cows, and subsequently increased costs for farmers. Before the advent of modern transportation, waterways were the highways of their time, especially for transporting bulky goods like food. Rivers and lakes provided a relatively efficient way to move goods from rural farming areas to urban centres. But when winter arrived and temperatures plummeted, these vital arteries could freeze over, causing major disruptions to the food supply chain. Imagine trying to drive a car on a road covered in thick ice. It's not going to be easy, and it's certainly not going to be fast. The same principle applies to boats and ships trying to navigate frozen waterways. Ice can block navigation, damage vessels, which would lead to the inevitable slowdown in travel. These disruptions could have serious consequences for inland towns and cities that relied on these waterways for food supplies. With transportation grinding to a halt, food could not reach these populations in a timely manner, leading to food shortages and price increases. Let's have a look now at food and provisions in a typical English winter during the Little Ice Age. Our ancestors had many secrets for the method of storing food and its preservation, as well as the ingenious ways they kept themselves hydrated. Imagine a world without refrigerators or freezers. How did people keep their food from spoiling? Well, they were quite the resourceful bunch. They employed a variety of techniques, each with its own unique charm. Let's start with pickling. This tangy method involves submerging food in a brine or vinegar solution, creating an inhospitable environment for nasty microbes. Think pickled cucumbers, onions, and even eggs. Next, we go on to smoking. This smoky process not only added a delectable flavour to meats and fish, but also helped to dry them out, inhibiting bacterial growth. Imagine the rich aroma of smoked ham or salmon wafting through the air. Drying was also popular. This simple yet effective technique involved removing moisture from food, preventing spoilage. Fruits, vegetables and herbs were often dried in the sun or wind, transforming them into lightweight portable snacks. Finally, we come to brining. This is quite similar to pickling. Brining involved soaking food in a salty solution, which drew out moisture and created an environment unfavourable for bacteria. Importantly, this method was often used for meats, such as corned beef. Grains, cereals and pulses, the staples of many diets, were stored in ceramic pots. These sturdy containers not only protected the food from pests and moisture, but also allowed for easy access when it was time to whip up a hearty stew or bake a loaf of bread. Dried fruits provided a concentrated source of energy. Milk, that creamy elixir from goats and cows, was transformed into a variety of delightful products such as butter, cheese and yoghurt. Water, of course, the essence of life, was sourced from a variety of places, one of these being wells. These man-made holes in the ground tapped into underground aquifers, providing a reliable source of fresh water. Rivers provided a convenient source of water for those living nearby, and during winter, if available, melted snow. Access to fresh water was vital, especially during extreme weather events like droughts or floods. Our ancestors ingeniously collected and stored rainwater, ensuring they had a supply of this precious resource even when nature wasn't cooperating. Fresh, clean water though was indeed difficult to come by in some built-up urban areas. Many people there relied on alcohol, such as ale, as a replacement. So all the talk of food and how to preserve it brings us neatly onto the Great Famine. Let's delve into the grim realities of this awful period in history, a period of widespread hardship that swept not just across England but the whole of Europe between the years 1315 to 1317. After you have heard what I have to say about the Great Famine, you will quickly realise that no matter who you were, the famine affected you in one way or another. Let's imagine trying to build a sandcastle on a beach that's constantly being battered by the waves. I think you would be right in saying that it would be a futile effort. That's what farmers faced in the spring and summer of 1315. Relentless rains transformed fields into muddy quagmires, making it impossible to plough and plant crops. We're not talking about just a drizzle of rain here, we're talking about biblical proportions of rainfall. The ground became so waterlogged that seeds simply rotted in the soil, instead of germinating. This initial agricultural disaster set the stage for the famine, as the lack of successful harvest meant dwindling food reserves as winter approached. It's like running out of fuel before you even leave the driveway on a long road trip. You're simply not going to get very far. As if the crop failures weren't bad enough, a devastating cattle disease that reduced livestock numbers by up to 80% swept through Europe, further compounding the misery. This was a full-blown epidemic that decimated herds. Imagine losing almost all of your livestock. A farmer's livelihood would be utterly destroyed. This loss had a double whammy effect. Firstly, it reduced the available food supply even further, as meat and dairy became scarce. Second, it reduced the availability of draft animals used for ploughing. With fewer oxen and horses to pull ploughs, farmers who could have planted in drier areas were hampered by a lack of animal power. This was a blow to the entire agricultural system. As the peasants became more and more desperate, they foraged for wild grasses, roots and tree bark, which provided minimal nutrition and was often difficult to digest. You imagine today trying to survive on a diet of grass and tree shavings. It's not exactly a nutritious or well-balanced meal. In the most extreme cases, there were reports of cannibalism as people, desperate for food, ate the recently deceased and even dug them up from graveyards. While some of these tales may be exaggerated in some accounts, or at least we would like to think they were, the very existence of such reports underscores the sheer desperation of the situation. It's a testament to the brutal reality of starvation when people are driven to such extremes. The Great Famine was indeed a time of widespread death. Mortality rates soared right across Europe. It reached 15% in southern England alone. Now, losing 10 to 15% of the population is a catastrophic loss. Imagine your town or city suddenly losing that many people. It would be a devastating blow to the community. These figures aren't just abstract numbers, they represent real people, families torn apart, lives cut short. The famine didn't discriminate, it affected people of all ages and social classes, although the poorest were undoubtedly the hardest hit. In times of crisis, people of course look to their leaders for guidance and support. And this crisis was no different. During the famine, both the government and the Catholic Church faced widespread criticism for their perceived inaction and ineffectiveness. People felt abandoned by the institutions that were supposed to protect them. The thing is, we're talking the 14th century here, so there wasn't and couldn't have been a coordinated large-scale relief effort. The limitations of medieval logistics hampered any attempts to alleviate the suffering of the masses. The famine basically acted like a giant stress test for the political system. It exposed weaknesses and fueled discontent. People blamed the king, who was then Edward II. Yes, you know the one. He wasn't the most popular king ever even before the famine, but now his government took the brunt of the population's wrath. They and the Catholic Church took the blame for simply not doing enough. This of course inevitably led to social unrest and political instability. So while the Great Famine was a disaster in itself, it also weakened the monarchy, fueled discontent and generally made things rather unpleasant for everyone involved. It just goes to show a well-fed populace is a much happier and less rebellious populace. The Great Famine stands as a stark reminder of the delicate balance between climate, agriculture and society's stability, not just for those far-off days, but maybe we should take heed today. You never know what's round the corner. Medieval winters, while challenging in terms of survival, also provided opportunities for unique forms of entertainment and indoor activities. With agricultural work largely suspended, people found ways to occupy their time and stave off boredom during the long dark months. So many's the time when the populace got together to have fun in the snow. They weren't just huddled indoors shivering, they embraced the winter wonderland, when they weren't desperately trying to survive of course. The frozen landscape offered a natural playground for winter sports. Snowball fights were a popular pastime, providing a light-hearted and energetic way to engage in friendly competition. Sledging using simple sleds made of wood was another common activity, particularly for children and young adults. Perhaps the most intriguing winter activity was ice skating. While modern skates with metal blades were not yet available, medieval people found creative ways to glide across frozen surfaces. They used polished wood or bones, often animal bones like cattle ribs or horse leg bones, which were smooth and sometimes attached to their boots with leather straps. These rudimentary skates allowed them to traverse frozen ponds and rivers, offering a unique form of winter recreation. When the weather was too harsh to venture outside, People engaged in various indoor activities. Wool spinning was a common household task, particularly for women. This involved turning raw wool fibres into yarn, which could then be used to weave cloth or knit garments. While a necessary chore, it also provided a social opportunity, as women often gathered together to spin and share stories. Storytelling was a central form of entertainment, especially in the absence of books and other forms of media. So, no streaming videos for you. People would gather around the fire and listen to tales of heroes, myths and legends, passed down through generations. These stories provided entertainment, education and a sense of shared cultural identity. For those seeking more structured forms of amusement, board games were a popular choice. Chess and older versions of backgammon, both games of strategy and skill, were enjoyed by people of various social classes. These games provided mental stimulation and friendly competition. Dice games were also common, offering a more chance-based form of entertainment. These games, often involving betting, could be quite lively and exciting. Well, let's face it, when life gives you lots of snow and ice, you might as well make lemonade, or perhaps in this case, hot spiced wine. The English populace during the Little Ice Age, despite facing some seriously tough winters, weren't ones to just sit around and mope. Well, not all the time. They showed a remarkable ability to adapt and even find joy in the frosty conditions. Imagine your local supermarket suddenly relocating to the middle of a frozen river. That's essentially what happened in many towns and villages in England when the local rivers froze over. Vendors set up stalls directly on the ice, selling everything from food and firewood to handcrafted goods. It wasn't just about commerce though. These ice markets became social hubs, bringing communities together during the long winter months. So the cold months did offer some much needed respite from the hardships of winter, offering a chance for people to connect with each other and find some joy in the midst of, well, let's face it, were challenging times. It's a reminder that even in the face of adversity, human nature finds a way to seek out amusement and connection. So while they definitely had their share of struggles, the people in those far off days also knew how to make the most of a snowy situation, proving that a little bit of winter fun can go a long way. So there we are. Winter survival for the generations that endured the Little Ice Age in England was a significant challenge, demanding a combination of resourcefulness, preparation and community support. The harsh realities of medieval winters, characterised by harsh weather, disease and limited resources, put the resilience of communities to the ultimate test. Success in navigating these difficult months relied heavily on proactive measures taken throughout the year. Communities often worked together to ensure that everyone had adequate supplies, particularly the vulnerable members of society such as the elderly, widows and orphans. But as we've seen, it wasn't all doom and gloom. Entertainment helped to pass the long dark evenings and maintain morale. These strategies not only helped people survive the physical hardships, but also maintained social cohesion and a sense of hope during the darkest months of the year. So, having heard all that, would you have coped? Well, thanks very much for watching yet another episode from History's Life Stories. Please like and subscribe if you enjoy these videos. Take care and I will see you next time.